You're watching WSTV Digital Media.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the August 9, 2018 meeting of the City County Planning Board. Would you please stand and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Today's meeting is being broadcast live on TV 13. It will be rebroadcast at 10 a.m. Friday morning, again at 4 p.m. Sunday afternoon. Our first item of business today is the consent agenda. These are items for which the petitioner is requesting withdrawal or continuance, or items for which the staff has recommended approval and no one has signed up to speak in opposition. For public hearings today, excuse me, each side will have a total of 12 minutes. There is no rebuttal period. Once the public hearing is closed and the board goes into work session, no one is permitted to speak unless a planning board member asks a question. For general use district zoning, the board must consider the full range of uses allowed in the zoning district being requested. Therefore, the petitioner may not refer to a specific use for the property. For special use zoning, however, you must be very specific about the intended uses of the site and details of how the site will be developed. Items under Section B of our agenda require final approval either by the City, County, or County Commissioners. As such, votes taken today will go to those parties for their consideration. If you're addressing the board today, before you begin your remarks, please give us your name, address, and zip code for the record. First order of business, approval of the minutes of July 12 and 26 meeting. Any additions or corrections?
Move approval.
Second.
Motion, Mr. Lamb, second, Mr. Leak. Any discussion? Those in favor? Any opposed? That's unanimous. Thank you. Now calling Aaron King for our consent agenda.
All right, first item B1 is zoning docket F1580, and this is a zoning jurisdiction conversion request. This is for about 2 acres on the north side of Hilltop Drive. It's currently, let me step back. This property was voluntarily annexed into the city of Winston-Salem several years ago. More recently, the owner of this property went to the General Assembly, the North Carolina General Assembly, and asked for this property to be de-annexed. That request was granted a couple of months ago, and so now this property is currently within unincorporated Forsyth County. Those of you that have been on the board for a while know that whenever we change jurisdiction, we need to change the zoning jurisdiction. It's a technical change, and that's what's before you today. So now that this property is back in unincorporated Forsyth County, we need to take the zoning jurisdiction and transfer it from Winston-Salem to Forsyth County, and that's what this request is. It doesn't change the use of the property. It still remains RS9, but approval of this request would take that zoning jurisdiction from city RS9 to county RS9. So with that, staff does recommend approval of this request.
Okay, no one has signed up. Is anyone here opposed to this recommendation? Seeing none, declare the public hearing closed.
Move approval.
Second. Motion, Mr. Lamb, second, Mr. Bryan. Any discussion? Those in favor? Any opposed? That's unanimous. Thank you.
Next item is B2, zoning docket W3377. This is a request to rezone about 1.5 acres from RM12S, that's residential multifamily, 12 units per acre, special use zoning, and RS9 to limited office, limited use zoning. And you can see the subject property there in yellow. It's on the south side of Walltown Street, just east of the Food Line Shopping Center there. This is the former Prodigal site I think folks are familiar with. The intent of this request is to clear up the usage of the property. Currently, the only use allowed on the property is Group Care Facility A. And so this would add church, offices. It would keep Group Care Facility A and add residential building, single family. And that probably brings in line the use of the property with the correct correct land uses and zoning terminology. Staff reviewed this. The area plan recommends institutional zoning for this property. We feel that the request, given those limited uses, fits that description. And with that, we would recommend approval of this LOL request.
Okay, thank you. Is anyone here opposed to this recommendation? Seeing none, declare the public hearing closed.
Move approval. Second.
Motion by Mr. Lamb, second by Mr. Leak. Any discussion? Those in favor? Any opposed? That's unanimous. Thank you.
Next item is B3, zoning docket W3378, and this is another zoning jurisdiction conversion request. This is for about almost 23 acres on the south side of Metal Ark Drive, south of Robin Hood Road. And the board may remember back in February of 2017, you approved a preliminary subdivision request for the arbors at Meadow Ark. And as a part of that subdivision approval, there was a condition that said the developer had to annex into the city of Winston-Salem. The reason for that is because the roads that were proposed within that subdivision were public, and for them to be maintained, they had to be within the city of Winston-Salem. And so now that the site has been graded, streets and utilities are in, the developer has come in and has started the annexation process. The annexation request will go to City Council in September. So again, what is before you today is a request to change the zoning jurisdiction from county to city. In this case, it would be the opposite of what you previously saw, from county MUS and RS9 to city MUS and RS9. And again, this is in keeping with the condition that you previously saw on there. And staff would recommend approval of this.
Anyone here opposed to this recommendation? Seeing no one, declare the public hearing closed.
Mr. Chairman, before we get a motion, I believe.
Ms. Smith needs to be recused.
Correct.
Right, I understand. Okay.
Move approval. Second.
Motion by Mr. Lamb, second by Mr. Leak. Again, Ms. Smith's been recused. Anyone in discussion? Those in favor? Those opposed? That's unanimous. Thank you.
The next item is B4, zoning docket W3379, and this is a request to rezone almost 24 acres from general industrial and RS9 to general industrial special use. You can see the subject property there in yellow. It's on the south side of Ziegler Road, just west of US 52. This is the northern edge of the Haynes Mill Road landfill. It's owned by City County Utilities. You may remember we saw within the past year or so a request to rezone this area on the top left corner to GIS. That was for dirt storage and borrow site. But what is before you today is to rezone this for the used recycling plant. And so this is the site plan that's been submitted with this request. So to get you oriented again, Ziegler Road would be along the northern edge, US 52 over here on the eastern edge. This area is already used for recycling of white goods, of refrigerators, appliances, things of that nature. This really just cleans it up and consolidates that existing RS9 that's no longer needed into one industrial category, the GIS zoning district, for that one use. A couple of items to point out. Access. There's no new access points included with this request. A negative access easement will be recorded along Ziegler Road, and obviously no access would be allowed from US 52. Access would come internal through the Haynes Mill Road entrance to the landfill, up along this edge and entering into the site in this area. You may see this area that's hatched on your site plan there. That's a 100-foot wide type 3 buffer. It's undisturbed is what's noted on the plan. There may be some areas that do need to be supplemented with new vegetation, but again, the intent there is to keep the aesthetic appearance along Ziegler and US 52. When we looked at the area plan recommends industrial use for this entire property. And so staff is supportive of this GIS rezoning request, and we would recommend approval.
Anyone opposed to this recommendation? Seeing none, declare the public hearing closed.
Move approval.
I have questions.
All right, we have a motion by Mr. Lamb. Is there a second?
Second.
Second, Ms. Smith. Okay. Mr. Brown?
Yeah, talk to me a little bit more about what a white goods recycling center does and byproducts of that, noise, things like that.
I might want to bring Jan up to talk about that, speak a little more intelligently on that.
Hello, my name is Micah Johnson. I'm a senior civil engineer with the city at Haynes Mill Landfill. The white goods area is an area where we temporarily store refrigerators, anything that has Freon in it, and that is the Freon is extracted safely there, and that is exported off-site. And the other white goods, the remaining portion of the white goods, like the refrigerators and air conditioners, are recycled. taken off-site and recycled at OmniSource.
Okay. So there isn't any component of noise and stuff like that along with this, even though it's a fairly rural area?
So what we were planning on doing in this area will be storing some cab, which is that concrete, asphalt, and brick there, and that will be stored. We already doing another portion of the landfill, and it will be stored there, ground up, and then used as our road base for our landfill there.
Okay. Okay. That helps.
Yeah, yes.
Yes, and I had a question about the asphalt aspect of it. Will the asphalt remain, it won't be heated or anything to release any vapors or anything like that?
No, it is strictly stored there until we get a large enough pile, and then we have a contractor come in, grind it up, and we use it for our road bed. So no additional processing to it.
Okay, and so as I understand it, the use is just recycling plant and not sanitary landfill. So there
Correct.
will be no sanitary landfill intended for this location.
That's correct.
Okay. And are there any other activities that can be done under the recycling plant use?
Nothing will be stored there long term. I mean, the intention of that site would be to recycle, whether it's concrete, asphalt, and brick. We'd already have the household, the white goods there, the refrigerators. So all those things are just temporarily placed on site, recycled, and moved off site. So nothing else would be there.
Okay, thank
placed
you.
there long term.
Just to be clear, though, even though it's currently not the intention, as far as the used recycling plant, anything that could be, that they could pull out of the stream and be recycled, put to use, could go there in the future. If they modified the plan, it would have to, go through a formal process to change the plan. But as far as on the site itself, they could do other streams of recycling, which would prolong the life of the landfill. I believe that the landfill, when it originally opened, or the new cell when it originally opened back in 2001, it was projected to, be the end of its life expectancy around 2020, and I believe they've already expanded that by 20 years by recycling and getting a lot of the product out of the stream. So, correct me if I'm wrong, but again, I just want to be clear that they could do other recycling there besides white goods and still comply with the used recycling plan, but they could not do sanitary landfill.
And Aaron, I don't know who's best to answer this, but when we were looking at the site, there is an interruption of trees. You mentioned something briefly about that. Talk to me about how that will be planted or buffered or whatever.
Yep. So the idea is for it to be a 100-foot wide undisturbed buffer, but like you say, where there are some interruptions there, we would be asking utilities to go back in and fill in those gaps, and we would look at the ratio of what is required for a 100-foot wide Type 3 buffer yard. We would compute the number of plants that need to go there and then work with them to fill in the gaps appropriately based on what the code requires.
Okay. Thanks.
Any other questions? We have a motion for approval. Those in favor? Any opposed? That's unanimous. Thank you.
Next item is B5. It's zoning docket F1581, and this is a request to rezone about 13.5 acres from agricultural to RS15S. You can see the subject property there in yellow. It's west of NC 66, and it adjoins Kernersville zoning jurisdiction on its western border there. This site may look familiar. A few months ago, the board saw the same request to rezone from AG to RS15S just to the south here for this portion. The board recommended approval of that, and it was ultimately approved by the county commissioners. Since that time, the developer's been able to acquire the subject property here to the north, and the idea would be that this would be an extension of or an addition to the subdivision that was previously approved. So to get you oriented, the road that you see coming up here was approved in the previous rezoning in Phase 1. It included lots on the northern edge here. The change to the existing plan is to provide a public street in this area that stubs into the subject property, which is outlined in red up here to the top. That new public street would continue eastward, and it would serve 23 new lots. All of those lots, again, this is not a PRD, so all of these lots are at least 15,000 square feet in size. As our staff reviewed this, we felt it was consistent with and comparable to the previous request that was approved, and it was a logical extension of the Steelwood subdivision. So we would recommend approval of this request.
Okay. Anyone here opposed to this recommendation? Seeing no one, declare the public hearing closed.
Move approval. Second.
Motion, Mr. Lamb, second by Mr. Leek. Any discussion? Those in favor? Any opposed? That's unanimous. Thank you.
Next item is B6. It's zoning docket W 3381, and this is a request to rezone 37 acres from highway business special use to general business special use. And you can see the site there in yellow. This is the former L.A. Reynolds Garden Center. I think most folks are familiar with that. It's on the east side of Stires Ferry Road, just south of Country Club Road. You can see the zoning pattern in the area. You've got a mixture of RS9 to the west. You've got an townhome community zoned RM8S directly south. To the east and to the north, you've got a mixture of industrial and commercial zoning in that area. What's before you today, we'll walk through the site plan a little bit, but Stires Ferry is located in this area, and again, Country Club is up to the north. This site plan attempts to utilize the existing access point that's currently located on Stires Ferry and the existing garden center commercial buildings that are located just a little bit southeast of there. So the idea behind this plan is to reuse those buildings for a mixture of uses. Brewery, restaurant, other retail spaces, farmers market is also included in this area. What's new to this plan is the multifamily building. So there's 6 new multifamily buildings, a cluster of 3 here, and then 3 running north-south in this area here. Those range in height from 3 to 4 stories, and there's a total of 229 units in there. And that comes out to a density of 6.16 units per acre. Pretty much the eastern half of this site is located within floodplain. And so obviously that limits development, and there's really no substantial changes proposed on the eastern half of that site. So as our staff started reviewing this from a zoning and a land use standpoint, we looked at the area plan, and the area plan recommends intermediate density residential for this up to 18 units per acre. And as I told you before, what is proposed here from a density standpoint is 6.16 units per acre. Our staff felt like that lower amount of density in combination with the reuse of this existing commercial space in an attempt to provide a good mixed-use project was a reasonable compromise, rather than going all the way up to 18 units per acre and doing a strictly multifamily project. So our staff is supportive from a zoning and a land use standpoint. We think this is a good reuse of this site. I do want to spend a couple minutes talking about transportation because that's probably the point where our staff had the most discussion on this. Again, as I told you, this would utilize the existing driveway point out onto Stires Ferry. We did look at Fath Road, which is located in this area. It's a public street, and it stubs into the subject property. We explored the idea of having a connection from Fath Road into the site. The problem with that is, as we discussed with our both DOTs, is that brings you out at an awkward spot into that intersection of Stires Ferry into Country Club Road. And both of our DOTs decided that was not a good thing. So that's why you do not see a vehicular connection there. What is there is an emergency services connection. There's a connection there, but it's gated so that only emergency services can get through there in the event the main entrance is blocked. As we looked at the balance of the site for opportunities for connectivity, you're bound in by Tomahawk Creek on the eastern side and then Reynolds Creek along the southern edge here. So opportunities for connectivity were very limited on this site. We did continue to talk about this from a transportation standpoint. A TIS was submitted with this request, and based on that TIS, our DOTs have required improvements, dedication of right-of-way, a right turn lane to be constructed into the site, curb and gutter along the frontage, and sidewalks. There's currently a left turn lane if you're heading southbound on Stires Ferry to get you in, and that would remain. As we talked a little bit further, our DOT had a little bit of concern, although the TIS supported what was going in here and supported the improvements that were being requested. In the event that this did become a safety hazard, our DOT wanted to be on the safe side. And so in your report, you will see a condition that says the developer has to post a bond in the amount of $250,000 prior to getting building permits. And the idea behind that is the city would hold that bond for a year period after the last CO was issued. So the project's built, we've issued the last CO, we've got the $250,000, and that allows our DOT staff to monitor the turning movements and the transportation in this area to determine if there's an accident issue or a safety issue. If there is, that money could be used to go in and perhaps install a signal or median. We tossed that out to the developer, and the developer said paying $250,000 up front before the first building permit is issued is a substantial burden. And so we've had a lot of dialogue with the developer and our DOTs over the past week to try to come up with something that meets the city's objective but allows some flexibility for the developer. And so I've got a revised condition that I want to read into the record and kind of walk through here and make sure that we're all on the same page. I'm sorry it's long. But that's just the way it is. So what staff is proposing is to replace that condition that's currently in the report with what's on the screen. I'll read this into the record, and I'll provide a little bit of commentary as we go through it. So prior to the issuance of building permits, the developer shall be required to post a bond with the City of Winston-Salem in the amount of $250,000 to be used to address potential traffic safety issues along the site's frontage on Stires Ferry Road. Again, the same overarching concept that's included in your book. Said bond shall be approved by the City of Winston-Salem. The entire $250,000 may be paid in its entirety prior to any building permits being issued. If something changes and the developer wants to pay it, that doesn't preclude them from doing that. But the more substantive part is the next sentence. The developer may also make a payment toward the $250,000 total proportionate to the building permit being requested. The amount of the payment should be determined by calculating the number of estimated vehicular trips directly associated with the corresponding building permit. So let's kind of walk through the methodology there. The amount of the bond is $250,000. We know that the total trips estimated for this project are 5,523. So if you take $250,000, divide it by that 5,523, it comes out to roughly $45 per trip. So what we would ask the developer to do as part of their building permit submittal package is to have their TIS provide a summary that says, for whatever the permit is, if it's a 5,000 square foot restaurant, their traffic engineer would say 5,000 square foot restaurant is intended to generate this many trips. We would take that number of trips, multiply it by 45, and that's the amount of money that we paid into that bond. Does that make sense to everybody? The idea is to allow a pay-as-you-go method that's based on some data. The amount of trips you're putting on the road is directly correspondent to the amount of money you're putting into the bond. And so that's what we worked with on that. The next sentence, the developer should be required to submit a detailed summary of the estimated number of trips with each building permit. Again, that's what I just explained to you. That's how staff is going to use. That's what staff is going to use to calculate this. Said summary should be sealed by the professional engineer responsible for drafting the TIS associated with this case, and the entire $250,000 bond shall remain in place for a period of 1 year beginning with the date of the last certificate of occupancy for the subject property. So the idea again is we will be holding this money for a while. This is going to take a while to build out, but the intent is after the last CO is issued, the clock starts, the 1 year period starts. And that 1 year period is the evaluation period for our DOT staff to adequately judge whether any improvements need to be made to that intersection. The applicant, and this is an addition, the applicant for the final building permit shall be responsible for payment of the outstanding balance that remains between the amount of bond money collected to the city up to that point and $250,000. So in the preceding building permits, if the estimates are low and we get to the last one and we've only accumulated $200,000 and the building permit only generates 200 trips and we've got a shortfall, sorry, the last guy in is going to be responsible for making up the gap. And the developer knows this going into it. We've got to make sure we get to that number by the end of the project. And the last thing, the bond should be required to be renewed annually until the 1 year time period described above. So we want to make sure that doesn't expire and the city has the money at the end of this period so that if there are issues, we can go out and adequately address them. So as you can see, we spent a lot of time on this going back and forth with the developer. We spent a lot of time working with our DOTs and with our city attorneys. To this point, everybody's in agreement and is comfortable with the condition that is before you today. So with this revised condition, staff would recommend approval of this GBS request.
One question for you, Aaron. In addition to the concerns about entering and exiting from Stires Ferry Road, are there any concerns on that site about parking? Because
No, there's actually, let me look through and I can tell you, there's actually, I think, an excess of parking that's being proposed.
440 spaces are required,
Okay.
and they're providing 584, so they're
Okay.
providing significantly more than what
Than
the
what it
ordinance
was.
requires. Yeah.
Okay, very good.
Do you want to? Yeah. Is anyone here opposed to the recommendation? Seeing no one, I declare the public hearing closed.
Okay, I move approval. Second.
Motion by Mr. Lamb, second by Mr. Lee. Any discussion?
Yes,
Okay.
I did have a question. You want to go first?
Well, just quickly, while you're on that subject, who tracks it? Inspections Department tracks it?
So we will be charged with enforcing that condition when the building permits come in. We will be in charge of making sure that information is there. We're going to have to coordinate closely with our DOT staff because in inspections, we're not really schooled in keeping bonds and renewing bonds. That's not something that we do. So that will be a function of Public Works, and we've kind of talked to DOT about making sure that we've got a system in place to collect the payments, to put it in a bond, and to make sure that bond is renewed annually so that somebody's keeping an eye on it.
All right, and then if they decide to do the first small phase and the market says, no, your units are too small, we want you to double the size of them, so they're going to cut their units in half. Now, when they apply for building permits, they're only going to be on pace to cover about half of that 250. What's the provision?
If we end up with a substantial change like that, it'll probably be time to bring this back through the process because transportation was such a key issue with this request. If there are substantial changes, we will need to bring that back through.
Okay, and then lastly, what prevents this developer from selling the land and the new purchaser not having any notice that this 250 bond requirement is in place?
You know, the conditions run with the land. I mean, that's obviously a disclosure issue between am I missing something? The buyer,
Well,
the
unless you
seller, and the new
record
buyer.
something at the Register of Deeds, they don't run with the land. So is that part of what you're going to do is record something?
It won't be recorded, but, I mean, from a land use and zoning standpoint, it's a requirement that has to be addressed prior to us issuing permits. Now, there was some discussion years ago about us moving towards the recordation of conditions as something that goes on at the Register of Deeds with the property, but it was decided that no one wanted to do that.
Okay.
But you know, from a when someone comes in and get a permit, they will know. And again, you don't know exactly, you know, on the transfer of the property what the attorneys research, but generally speaking, on something of this magnitude, they're more than likely going to want a zoning letter, and as part of that zoning letter, we send the plan and conditions of approval as part of that zoning letter that someone purchases.
I'm just concerned that it's an unusual bookkeeping type of requirement for us, and I'm just concerned that the condition will fall through the cracks, especially if this thing gets delayed for 2 or 3 or 4 years. And
I was going to say, I don't think it will fall through the cracks. I am more concerned about the transfer of property and it being an issue there. I mean, the alternative to this is $250,000 up front. Right. So, I mean, again, what we have tried to do is work with the developer to come up with a reasonable solution that addresses what we see as could be a key factor on the site going down the road as far as potential safety issues, but also being cognizant of the fact that, you know, we need to work with the developer to try to make something feasible on the project.
have we ever done this before?
Not exactly like this.
A variation of
No.
The last one that we did a variation of was the Audubon Drive subdivision on Reynolda Road. Some of you may remember that. Yeah. There were some issues about turning movements there, and so we, Winston-Salem DOT allowed turning movements to come out onto Reynolda with a 1-year bond in place so that if accidents were a problem, we could take that money and seal up that median right there to prevent those turning movements. So that's the closest we've done.
So in essence, DOT is agreeing to this. I mean, it has been a party to this all
Yes.
along, and it seems like they're the primary person, that
Yes.
entity that's going to have control over this, not requirements of planning staff beyond that. So it's not something we're saying we're going to keep up with and monitor. It's under DOT and their jurisdiction with the bond.
As far as the money and as far as the decision when there is an issue, all we will be doing is, as part of the issuance of the permit, we will tell them this is the amount that you have to pay into that bond. Right. But beyond that, we won't have anything to do with the bond. It would just be, we'll tell them you've got X number of trips and it's X times 45, that's what you have to pay into the bond.
So if they don't pay, then is the zoning going to revert?
It wouldn't revert, we just wouldn't issue the permit.
Okay, so there's some controls on.
Correct.
I applaud your
Yeah.
creativity in trying to work something out. I've paid signalization deposits before for railroad crossings and whatever else. So it is I applaud the creativity. I am concerned about the accountability that, falling through especially if the project is drawn out. Anyway.
Ms. Dunnigan, you had a
Yeah,
question?
I had a question about the timetable here. If I understand this correctly, after the last one, if this is built out over a period of several years, the one-year time clock doesn't start until the last.
Correct.
Okay.
So there's an incentive for the developer to move this along because that money's tied up for a longer time period, the longer this project takes.
All right. And then my other question had to do with technical issue with the transportation study. I just wanted to know, since the Beltway is going in right around there, if that study had taken into consideration whether people would be turning left or right to get onto the Beltway.
Yeah, I probably want to bring Jeff Ansler with Winston-Salem DOT up to answer that question for you.
Thank you, Aaron. Mr. Chairman, members of the board, Jeff Ansler with City DOT here in this building, 100 First Street. We did look at the Beltway, and the study analyzes 2020 build year, and the timetable for when the Beltway would be presented is a little bit too far out to know exactly what all the traffic would do. Based on the analysis and careful consideration of existing volumes and proposed volumes and the number of trips generated by this site, we feel that there's adequate capacity on the existing and adjacent facilities to handle what the improvements they're recommending. And the bond, I'll just speak briefly to that to add to what Aaron was saying. The bond is as an additional tool just to, as this builds out over we're not sure how long. And that's the issue I think we're all looking at. We don't want something to develop 6-7 years now, and we really don't really know what traffic may be and how things change with growth in the area. So that is an additional tool. But we did look at that. One issue I do want to be clear on too is the study looked at the intersection of Country Club and Steyer's Ferry, just 700-800 feet north of this site, which is a major traffic generator, major intersection for the city. And we have already identified critical improvements we can make today that are not currently in the field, and our staff is already on that to improve that today. And with this additional and those improvements, in addition to the turn lanes that they're widening and the things that this site is proposing, we feel confident that this site will be sufficient and the improvements will be sufficient for this use.
That was actually one of my concerns, Jeff. What are the improvements in that intersection that you're considering right now? Because, it will eventually all be hooked up to the Beltway, 5-6 years from now, let's hope? Or
Your guess is as good as mine. So, yes, improvements exactly as the left turn onto the westbound left turn onto Steyer's Ferry. The counts indicated, and I had good verification just knowing the growth in the area, that the actual left turn has more volume than the through movement. It's not typical, and typically with our signal phasing and timing, left turns do not have more time than the through movement, which is the case there, and we have almost double the amount of traffic turning left at that intersection headed south on Steyer's Ferry than are actually going through. So that is a concern, and our staff has already been tasked. I personally tasked them with coming up with recommendations to improve that function, because we have a level of service D on that movement now, and I think that we're really confident we can improve that immediately. And it's
but
an error.
you're doing that with signaling?
That's correct.
So no other improvements to that intersection?
That's correct.
How about with the Beltway? Are there planned improvements to that intersection with the Beltway?
Not
in
that
the
I'm
future?
aware of.
Not that you're aware of. Okay. I'm surprised. Okay.
Any other questions?
I have some other questions for Aaron.
Okay.
Aaron, from looking at this, the existing building is in a floodplain. What's the history on that?
Yeah, it looks like that portion right in there. I don't know the date that was built. I do know that let me get to it here. This was originally approved in 1987, so I'm not sure. I doubt that building was in the floodplain when it was built. Maybe perhaps the floodplain came and expanded over time, but I suspect that building has been there at least since 87, perhaps longer.
Is there any, solid foundation structure there in that floodplain, or is it all the open greenhouse and
To my recollection, there is an actual building there, a structural building there. I believe it was where you would go in, and that was kind of their indoor building where you would buy the products that couldn't be out in the weather. I don't know if the applicant has any more to add to that, but I know there were some additional actual buildings there in addition to the greenhouses.
What's the elevation of the apartments compared to that floodplain? Because I mean, from observing that site, the water isn't going to go to the south. The only way it can go is toward that area because of the bluff on the other side.
5, 6.
Yeah, it looks like the elevation, the existing elevation around the stream bank is 730, and the finished floor elevation of those two southernmost apartment buildings are 735 and 738 respectively.
So
5 to 8 feet.
okay. Now walk me through this other exit too. Why were you all in DOT so set about not using that other exit? I mean, most of the time when we're talking about developments like this, we're talking about entrances and exits having two.
Yep.
We've got all the traffic pouring out on a curve right now where people tend to run a little fast, as they're going around there, and you're coming up to the road. You're not level with the road when you're coming into it.
Yeah.
So why wasn't there more consideration on that other exit and giving that as an opportunity for that?
I probably want to bring Jeff back up to speak to that.
Thank you, Mayor. Jeff Fanzer. The issue is not so much, I think, with exiting traffic, even though it is because its proximity to the signal and its distance from the separation of the stop bar, and then, of course, the queue link that would just prohibit folks from being able to exit just because of folks that are in that queue already waiting for the light to turn. But the issue, too, is left turns into the site. And if they're waiting, if the signal has them stop in that left turn lane, waiting to turn left onto Shallowford, and then someone is wanting to turn down that Fath Road, that just turned left on from Country Club, then they're stopping and potentially backing up in the intersection, causing a real traffic concern. Not only intersection delay, but safety, right angle collisions, and things of that nature. So it's more of an issue of safety with turns into the site.
Yeah, well, I mean, couldn't it have been limited to right out only or something? Because, traffic going into Winston-Salem there or into church or shopping centers would seem, into Walmart, Sheetz, whatever, would seem to be going, a lot of traffic would seem to be going right.
And I'm sure that would be the case, but again, difficult to do just because it's geometric location and signal operation.
I think that's a shame.
Okay. Any other questions, Mr. Brown?
I think that's good.
Any further discussion? We have a motion for approval. Those in favor? Any opposed? That's unanimous. Thank you.
Okay, last item is item C1. It's PBR 2018-02, and this is for a 4-lot expansion of the Brockton subdivision. It's a PRD located on the east side of Petrie Road, just a little bit northwest of Mount Tabor High School. So Mount Tabor will be down here in this IP area, and the subject property shown in yellow here, 1.27 acres in size. And this is the site plan that's been submitted with this request. It proposes 4 lots that would front onto Brockton Lane and become part of the PRD. They do have their open space, their thoroughfare open space along the edge here. And I would note that all 4 of these lots, this is RS9 zoning, all 4 of these lots are large lots. The smallest is about 10,000 square feet in size, and the largest is about 19,000 square feet in size. So these are large lots. Staff felt this was a reasonable request because it got all 4 of these driveway cuts onto Brockton Lane. instead of putting those onto Petrie Road, which was one of the options available. So we believe this is a good thing to get the access oriented towards Brockton Lane. And staff would recommend approval of this PBR request.
Move approval.
Second. Motion, Mr. Lamb, second, Mr. Leak. Any discussion? Those in favor? Any opposed? That's unanimous. Thank you.
I was thinking about something.
All right, Ms. Margaret, I guess we're up to you.
We are. I presented the draft annual report to you at your meeting, your work session in July. I would be happy to answer any questions. If you have any comments, other than that, we would ask for you to approve it, and we'll bring it back to you all pretty.
Move approval.
Second.
Motion, Mr. Lamb, second, Mr. Leak. Any discussion? Those in favor? Any opposed? That's unanimous.
Thank
you. All right. Staff report.
All right. That was quick. First thing I want to do under staff report is I want to read, Paul had sent a thanks, so I just want to read this. Said, thank you all. This is to planning board members and staff. Thank you all so very much for the wonderful send-off last Tuesday. It was fantastic and something I will always cherish. It was so great to see everyone who came and gave their time to help me celebrate the occasion. The food and drink and venue were excellent, and thanks so much for the very kind things that were said, as well as the gifts, all of which will be remembered. Thank you also for all your support over the years and your counsel and guidance as we have moved toward a more livable future. I wish you the very best in finding the next director to work with over the next several years and planning for an even greater future for our wonderful community, Paul. So I wanted to let you know, I wanted to read that, and of course then to be ugly, he sends us a video of him enjoying his time on the beach, so while we're all stuck here. But beyond that, to let you know, cases for September, we had pre-submittal earlier this week. We already have 4 zoning cases in, which is a combination of some limited use rezonings and some, I think maybe 1 or 2 special use district zonings and a couple subdivisions. We'll have the filing deadline on Monday. The next thing is, this is primarily for the city appointees, but I believe we emailed out to all planning board meetings last week, and I believe the final official email came out earlier this week about dates for the mandatory sexual harassment and diversity training classes that the city will offer. Again, city appointees, it's mandatory, so please sign up for that. County appointees, it's encouraged but not required. Just an update, the county commissioners at their August 2nd meeting, it was in your agenda book, did approve the West Suburban Area Plan update. So that concludes what we're calling Area Plan 2.0, and we'll move into 3.0 moving forward. We'll have some more information related to that. A couple other things of note for the community character team. The downtown streetscape master plan contract was finally signed, so there will be a contractor that we've hired to work on that plan. Will be starting in the very near future, so hopefully we can get a plan to y'all and to the elected officials to come up with a master plan on how we want our downtown streets to look like, since we're going like gangbusters downtown. Also, Old Salem infrastructure rehab is underway. Our staff has been involved, along with NCDOT staff, or excuse me, Winston-Salem DOT staff and utility staff, trying to make sure that there are minimal disruptions to the historic character of Old Salem, as well as our staff has begun the process of the West End historic guideline update and the Bethania creation of the Bethania guidelines. 2 other things. The NCAPA conference will be in Winston-Salem this year. Just remember that September 12th, 13th, 14th, if you'd like to go. I would certainly encourage that. And then finally, and probably the best piece of news for y'all, unless you object, is at this point we don't have anything that's pressing for work session, so our recommendation is to cancel your August 23rd work session. There are a couple of reports that are due to you, but they're not due until October. there doesn't seem a lot of need to have that meeting, and we normally take either July or August off anyway, so I'm sure there won't be an objection to that.
So moved.
And with that, that's all I have as far as staff report.
Could I ask a question, Ron? What's the holdup with the zoning approval on the Burger King on Martin Luther King?
It's not an issue with staff. It's an issue with the local franchisee who's wanting to do the work wants to do the work, but they don't own the property. It's still owned by Burger King corporate, and they are trying to acquire the property. So that's kind of been the hang up and the hold up. It's been closed for a while, and as Councilmember Burke alluded to, it doesn't look the prettiest at times, but they're trying to acquire it so then that they can control it and go through the process to, I'm assuming, demolish and rebuild. So hopefully that will happen, but it's not a staff or a council problem with it. It's just acquisition of the property by the franchisee.
Burger King's benefit in holding the property as long as they can. Is there anything that they're holding it for?
I'm unaware of the negotiations. I just know that was one of the things that was a discussion topic whenever it was actually going through here, was they wanted to acquire it and they were having issues with the acquisition. So.
Get rid of it.
And Chris, are we going to get the report from the consultant on the UDO in September then?
Well, we hope. There are still delays, and we are wanting to get something to you. I'll leave it at that at this point. If things change one way or the other, we will let you know prior to your September meeting. Since we won't have a work session, and we won't be updating you at that point, but let's just say that there may be some issues that we're going to have to work out with the attorney's office, and I'll leave it at that.
And I would think the other thing about the work session is hiring a new planning director, and I was assuming that we would be doing something in September and that we would have the opportunity to view some of the interviews, or they would be videotaped and provided for us. What is the timeline on that? Arnold, you may know as much as.
It's my understanding that the next assessment is August 23rd and 24th, which would be your which would be your work session date. So there wouldn't be anything to come out of that at that point. I guess they've narrowed the field down to whatever they want to bring in to do the assessment. And then following that, I'm assuming, is whenever they would make available all the information that came out of the information they submitted. I don't know how far back they go, but whenever they first submitted the intermediate step of the phone interview and the additional screening questions, and then also what they would do at the assessment. I assume all that information would be available following that assessment, so it would take you into the beginning of September.
I think we made some additional requests there. Who's the best person to talk with Mr. Strauss about that?
Well, I don't know that it would be with Mr. Strauss. I mean, he is helping, but it may actually be talking to the HR director, Carmen, because before Greg left, I think Greg was running kind of roughshod over it, but since his departure, I believe Carmen Caruth, the HR director, is helping and coordinate that with Mr. Strauss.
And so in lieu of the work session, will we have an email that will be giving us some heads up on some dates in September for?
Again, I can't speak directly to that because they're not going through me. I would assume
be caught, at the last minute with scheduling and stuff. I
haven't been given any dates. I mean, we'll certainly keep you guys advised, give you as much notice as we can when we hear something. But
get it out to us some way so we can start putting it in our calendars.
If I hear anything, I will make sure to communicate that. But like I said, I don't think they're going to be talking to me about it. More than likely, it would be direct communications with the chairman and or the planning board members all at one time. So.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure Paul's recording this today. Watch it when he gets back. So I know we got out of here in 45 minutes. So we're very efficient in his absence. Just in case he's not recording, pass that along to him.
He's probably watching it online on the beach.
Okay. Hey, Paul. Anything for the good of the order? Ms. Smith?
Well, then it's motion to adjourn. Well, hopefully there's some sunshine out there this afternoon.
We're adjourned.
All right. Thank y'all.